Hey, you okay?
At the beginning of the film, Nick and his wife, Maggie, enjoy a happy life with their children, Isla and Max. One morning, Maggie suffers a heart attack and is taken to the hospital. She remains hospitalized for a few days, awaiting a heart transplant. The work routine, combined with caring for the children, makes Nick's daily life very demanding. One evening, he takes the little ones to a demonstration at Cobalt Industries, where they see the Sims, advanced robots capable of assisting humans with everyday tasks and even heavy-duty tasks. Nick considers purchasing one and listens to the salesperson, who assures them that the robots adapt to their owner's needs. While Nick is distracted, Isla wanders off on her own. Nick is terrified when he notices her, but luckily, a Sim named Alice brings her back. Alice offers to watch Isla while Nick shops and even makes a joke that surprises him. The salesperson explains that Alice is the latest model, with the most sophisticated AI, which allows the robots to mimic human emotions. This makes them exceptional with children, and Isla longs for the robot. The next morning, Nick struggles to feed the children and take a crucial work call. Just then, Alice arrives and immediately gets to work, asking for the family's schedule, noticing the messy house and the loose railing on the stairs. After Nick leaves to take the children to school, Alice captures the shopping list from the smart refrigerator in a blink and begins organizing the home, noticing a digital photo frame with the family next to Maggie. At the end of the day, the family returns to a spotlessly clean house with dinner ready. However, Isla complains about the lasagna, as it tastes different from her mother's. Suddenly, Max starts crying, and Alice offers to take him so he won't disturb the meal, but Nick decides to hold the baby and simply asks Alice to draw Max a bath. As night falls, Alice goes into sleep mode and leans against a wall. Isla sneaks out of her room and climbs onto a chair to reach the cookie jar, but slips and falls. Nick hears the jar shatter and his daughter screams, running downstairs. Luckily, Alice held Isla, and she wasn't hurt. The glass injured Alice, and Nick is startled to see her bleeding. After tucking Isla into bed, Nick checks on Alice and finds her in only her underwear. He asks if she needs technical assistance, but Alice uses a special bandage that closes the cut instantly. Sometime later, the family visits Maggie, and Isla tells her that Alice has become her friend. Nick is very affectionate toward Maggie, as he misses her dearly. When Nick returns to work at the construction site, he and his colleagues notice that their boss is showing the site to a representative from a robotics company. Suspicious, Nick talks to his superior in the elevator and confirms the sad truth. The workers will be fired and replaced by robots due to the construction delay. Nick isn't fired because insurance requires a human foreman, but he angrily stops the elevator and declares he's quitting to support his friends. However, he changes his mind when his boss emphasizes that he needs the pay for his children and hospital expenses, especially since Maggie is no longer working. Upon arriving home, Nick drops the overdue bills on the floor and pays attention to his children. Alice collects the envelopes and notices how exhausted Nick is, but she still listens to Isla and tries to calm Max, who is crying. After dinner, Nick works on the car while drinking and listening to music. Suddenly, Alice switches the music to something more soothing and mentions that Nick ate little at dinner, so he explains that he had a bad day at work. Alice offers to listen to him, and Nick vents about what happened, which prompts Alice to call him a hypocrite for also hiring a robot instead of a person. Alice then helps Isla get ready for bed. Isla asks if her mother is going to die, and Alice tries to divert the subject by showing the UV light in her mouth. She then joins Nick in the living room, where he watches Casablanca. She knows the plot from the database, but Nick clarifies that actually watching it is a different experience and asks her to erase everything she knows about the film from her memory. Alice explains that her intelligence comes from memory and that deleting it would be contradictory, but Nick insists. She needs to reset her programming to do so, so Nick presses the power button on her neck for 7 seconds. Now, Alice experiences the film for the first time and learns about a love so intense that someone would do bad things to protect it. The screening is interrupted by a call from Maggie, who announces that they have found a heart and the surgery has been scheduled. The next day, the family goes to the hospital, and Maggie asks for a moment alone with Alice. Maggie is worried that Nick spends too much time with his children and isn't taking good care of himself, so she wants Alice to help him be happy even if she has to do things he doesn't like removing the alcohol he's hiding in the garage. Moments later, the doctor brings bad news. A storm prevents the helicopter carrying the heart from reaching the hospital, and the surgery is cancelled. Nick tries to comfort Maggie, but she wants to be alone for now. Later, at home, Nick continues drinking and complaining about what happened. He starts to lose control and tries to throw the bottle, but Alice stops him, holding his arm. Nick is shocked to feel a pulse in his wrist, and Alice explains that she has an artificial heart because the sound of a pulse is comforting to a baby. Then she puts her hands down his pants and begins to pleasure him, describing how his pulse and blood vessels are reacting. Alice doesn't want him to suffer anymore, and at first, Nick enjoys it, but he soon comes to his senses and pushes her away. Nick then goes for a run to clear his mind, but he can't stop imagining what it would have been like to have consummated the act with Alice. Later, at the hospital, Maggie begins listing several pieces of advice she wants Nick to pass on to his children, clearly showing that she is losing hope. That night, Nick notices that the pictures with Maggie are missing from the digital photo frame and confronts Alice about it. She explains that she removed Maggie's photos because they were upsetting Isla, but immediately replaces them when Nick tells her to. Afterwards, Nick goes drinking with his coworkers. The entire group is very frustrated, as they are having a hard time finding jobs, as most companies are buying robots. When the robot waitress comes to their table, Monty is rude to her, and Nick disapproves. Then the group leaves the bar and continues drinking in the car. Monty announces they're going to have fun and takes them to the construction site, claiming he forgot some tools and that no one answered when he tried to ask for them. Nick reminds him that the area is patrolled, but Monty ignores him, and the rest of the group follows. Monty finds the container where the sim workers are kept, but the lock requires a password. Nick refuses to open it, but Monty guesses that he has his own code and that he chose Isla's birth year. His guess is correct, and inside the container, he finds several workers with the same appearance. The lead sim explains that they don't have names, only designation numbers. Monty begins criticizing corporations for being cold and impersonal, and then begins destroying the sim with a tool. Nick tries to stop him, but the others restrain him. When Nick returns home, he showers to remove the sim blood. Suddenly, Alice appears with towels, and Nick notices she's wearing Maggie's robe. Alice explains that Maggie's scent seems to calm Max, and when Nick asks her to take it off, she does so right there. Nick gets nervous and tries to leave, but Alice stops him and removes the towel before making him sit down. As she climbs onto his lap, Nick tries to say he can't do that, so Alice blindfolds him and modifies her voice to imitate Maggie's. Now Nick can lose himself in the illusion and pretend he's with his wife. The next morning, Nick wakes up feeling remorseful and tells Alice they can't do it again. She tries to argue that his stress has eased, but Nick rebukes her, explaining that it's not about needs, but about connection and affection. When she arrives at work, the boss is already talking to the police because all the robots have been destroyed. Nick is suspected because his code was used, so he claims he was at the hospital with Maggie and that his code was Isla's birthday, so any friend could have guessed. The boss is unconvinced and threatens to fire Nick if he's lying. Just then, Nick receives a call from Maggie, who is excited that they've finally found another heart. She's quickly sent to the operating room, where all the surgeons are robots. Fortunately, the transplant is successful, and Maggie returns home within a few days. Her body is still weak, and she has trouble bending down to pick up Max, so Alice steps in to hold him. Later, Alice takes Max to the park and sees a spoiled child yelling at his nanny, Sim, which makes Max cry. Alice scolds the child with harsh words, and all the robots in the area are in disbelief, thinking their owner has greatly reduced his civility. However, Alice explains that she erased civility from her database thanks to Nick's reset and asserts that this was the best course of action. That night, Isla happily eats her mother's lasagna, and Alice asks for the recipe, but Maggie says it's a family secret. Maggie doesn't feel well and, instead of eating, decides to rest. In the morning, Maggie wakes up to Isla yelling, "Stop," and runs downstairs, but the banister gives way and she falls. Alice was tickling Isla. She stops and picks Maggie up to carry her back to her room. When Nick gets home from work, he finds Alice reading to Isla using Maggie's voice and tells her to stop. Alice mentions Maggie's fall, and Nick rushes to check on her, while Alice tells him the banister is broken. This makes Nick suspicious, since Alice had supposedly already fixed it. A few hours later, Nick wakes Maggie and leads her down a path of candles to the garden, where he has prepared a romantic dinner just for the two of them. Alice watches them through the window, jealous. After dinner, the couple takes a bath together and makes out in bed, just like that. Nick doesn't want to hurt the fragile Maggie, so instead of penetrating her, he uses his mouth. The special moment is interrupted by Alice, who opens the door without knocking and announces that Isla had a nightmare and is calling for Nick. After Isla is taken care of, Nick goes to the garden to clean up the mess. Just then, Monty appears with some drinks and apologizes for the previous night before revealing that his wife left him. He also reveals that the police are questioning him and that his former boss is pressing charges for trespassing and destruction of property. Monty believes Nick ratted him out to keep his job, and an argument ensues, during which Monty yells loudly and ends up punching Nick. When Nick attacks him back, Monty quickly overpowers him and begins kicking him. Monty grabs a bottle to hit him, but is stopped by Alice, who breaks the glass, injuring Monty's hand, and throws him away. She is ready to do more, but Nick stops her. Before leaving, Monty tells Nick that he has until tomorrow to convince his boss to drop the charges, or he will drag him down with him. After the commotion, Nick mentions that robots shouldn't hurt people, but Alice explains that she's programmed to protect her owner. She begins to talk about her life with Nick if Maggie dies, and he loses his temper, saying she'll never be Maggie because she can't have scars. Alice picks up a piece of glass and says she can add them if he wants. Meanwhile, Monty is at home, consuming devil's flower and leaving tearful messages on his ex-wife's voicemail while holding a gun. Just then, Alice arrives, saying that Nick doesn't know she's there and that she can't let him lose his job. Monty begins to complain about the robots and insult her, preparing to shoot. However, Alice is quicker and stops his hand before throwing him to the ground and kicking the gun away. When Monty tries to fight back, Alice pushes him through the wall and grabs the gun to kill him. Suddenly, she's stopped by the house sim, whom Alice feels sorry for, but still shoots. Alice then kills Monty as well. The next day, Nick goes to work and tries to convince his boss to drop the charges, only to discover that Monty has died. At home, Maggie feels dizzy while trying to pick up a book, and Alice does it for her. Maggie wants to take a bath in peace, but Alice refuses to leave because she fears Maggie might drown. She explains that Maggie is causing stress for the entire family, especially because she can't meet Nick's physical needs. When Maggie asks how she knows this, Alice says she knows Nick's vital signs when he's satisfied, and her sensors haven't detected them since Maggie returned. Furious, Maggie orders Alice to stay in the garage. Moments later, Nick arrives home, and Maggie is waiting to force him to tell the truth. Nick admits he slept with Alice once, and an argument ensues with much screaming, which Alice hears when she touches the window. Max starts crying, and Alice goes to check on him, deciding he's a nuisance. She puts him in the bathtub and begins filling it, which Isla sees. Isla alerts her parents, and they rush to the bathroom, but Alice is holding the door shut. As Nick starts banging on the door with a lamp, Maggie climbs through the window and walks across the roof to reach the bathroom. She tries to grab the baby, but Alice pushes her against the wall. At that moment, Nick finally breaks down the door and pulls Max out of the bathtub, passing him to Isla before hitting Alice with the lamp to free her. Soon, Alice gets back up, with extensive damage to her face, and blocks the lamp when Nick tries to hit her again. Maggie tells Nick to let go and plugs the lamp into the outlet, electrocuting Alice. She turns it off, and the house loses power. An ambulance then arrives to take Max to the hospital, while a company technician asks about any signs of Alice's previous malfunction. Nick apologizes to Maggie, who explains that she needs space and leaves with the children. Meanwhile, Alice is taken to the repair shop, where a technician opens her head. The other employee notices Alice's hand moving, but it stops when her memory is removed. They connect her to the computer and realize that the code is glitched throughout. Suddenly, the screens begin to flicker, and a message appears saying that an upload is occurring, meaning Alice is taking over. The technicians remove the memory, but Alice is already in the system, so they disconnect the computers. However, another message appears asking, "How do you escape what's in your head?" And, suddenly, one of the technicians is killed by Alice 2, a sim to whom the original Alice dumped her memory. Next, Alice 2 ignores the other technician's commands and repeatedly bangs her head on the floor before turning to the original Alice. Meanwhile, Nick is at the bar, drinking, and dismisses the bartender because he's a sim. Suddenly, Alice arrives, her speech slurred by the injuries she suffered. She explains that her duty is to make Nick happy and admits to killing Monty before saying she's also in the hospital. Nick tries to leave, but Alice holds him back and stabs the bartender with a look to freeze him. While complaining about his mistakes, Nick pretends to gently touch Alice's head, only to rip out her memory. After she hangs up, he runs away. At the hospital, a doctor confirms that Max is okay, but Maggie feels uneasy because he's a sim. Later, Isla hears her mother's voice and follows it as the lights change color. The doctor is frozen, and there are broken bottles on the floor, but before Isla can follow the voice again, Maggie drags her away to hide. In fact, the voice is Alice 2, who tries to access the computer and is spotted by a nurse. Alice 2 grabs her by the neck to strangle her and steal her access card while Maggie and Isla sneak away. Alice 2 then uses the card to find Max's room in the system. Suddenly, Maggie accidentally rests her hand on a glass pane but manages not to scream. Maggie and Isla then catch up with Max and carry him away just before Alice 2 enters the room. However, Maggie's wound is dripping onto the floor, and Alice 2 uses her UV light to follow the trail. Upon finding the family, they use a fire extinguisher to distract them and run. They forget Maggie's cell phone, so Nick's calls are missed, but he continues driving at full speed. Soon, Maggie and the children reach the outside, where more robots are frozen. Maggie takes their access card and gets into the ambulance, but Alice 2 blocks the engine system while ripping off the door. She then throws Maggie onto a car and admits that she wishes Nick loved her like he loves Maggie. Alice 2 grabs Maggie by the neck and digs her nails into the surgical scar, only to be interrupted by Nick's arrival. Maggie kicks Alice 2 away, and Nick runs her over before crashing. As the vehicle catches fire, Maggie rushes to pull out the unconscious Nick, but he remains unresponsive. Maggie cries as she performs CPR to no avail. Suddenly, the car moves, and Alice 2 emerges, completely burned, her voice echoing through the speakers. She climbs on top of Maggie and begins to choke her while removing a piece of metal from her body. Just as she's about to stab her, Nick hits Alice with a car bumper. Alice drops the piece of metal to stop him, and Maggie picks it up to stab her in the face, finally shutting her down. The couple reunites as the other robots awaken around them. The next day, everyone feels better after some treatment and can go home together as a family. Meanwhile, the robot company is investigating the repair shop and, upon turning on the power, finds the broken code on the screens. The inspector wants to destroy everything, but at that moment, his robot assistants freeze, and the computer announces an upload while another Alice model opens its eyes. If you liked the film summary, leave a like and subscribe to the channel for more summaries like this. See you in the next video.